Coaching is easy to learn and hard to master. I mean, there's a reason that organizations like the International Coaching Federation require a minimum 100 hours or 500 or thousands of hours, depending on the level of certification you're trying to attain. It's going to just take years to get better and better and better at this. And it's sort of in identifiable stages. You learn sort of these basic competencies, basic skills. Can I just craft a great question? And once you get that down and it becomes second nature, it frees up your cognitive load. Now you have the mental resources to sort of notice what's happening with the client a little more. And now you're like, oh, okay. Now I'm noticing more. And that means I can ask better questions because I already can ask a good question. I already have that architecture, that skill. But now I can apply it to the thing I'm noticing. So now it's a targeted question. And then as you get better at that, it really frees you up to make even kind of more advanced decisions, like when shouldn't I ask a question? When should I have the client pose a question to themselves? When should I pose a more challenging question? Should I phrase it in a way that's a bit of a push rather than a bit of a support? And so, you're always kind of on this evolutionary continuum.
Okay, I'm joined here with Robert Biswas Diener. Robert is the author of several books, including Positive Provocation, which this interview is going to focus on, and another book called The Upside of Your Dark Side. So when I was preparing for this interview, Robert, it kind of struck me that you seem to have a bit of a superpower for original thinking and not blindly following the conventional wisdom. You seem to really think for yourself. So I'm just curious, how has this benefited you in your life and as a coach? And to what extent is this something is it nature or nurture? Is this something that you've learned, or is this something that's always been part of your life, would you say?
Niall, thanks so much for that as a first question. I feel very recognized by it because indeed that is sort of just how I approach the world. I've always been a little bit, I don't want to just say an out of the box thinker, but just a little bit of a counterpoint thinker. I'm slow to accept the status quo. I can think pretty critically, but I'm not looking just to dismiss things. I'm looking actually for holes and how I might help to fill them in. I want to avoid that kind of trollish appearance of, just I'm out there just kind of nitpicking people. I think it comes naturally to me, and I think it's been reinforced across my lifespan. So I've really received a lot of kind of praise and acknowledgement for it, but I also think it's gotten me into a lot of trouble. So it's interesting because this is in some ways true of all strengths. I'm not a big believer in the idea that a strength can also be a weakness. I think that's definitionally impossible. But I think that we can misuse our strengths. I think that we sort of learn how to employ our strengths better across the lifespan. And so if this is a strength, whatever we're calling this thing, thinking differently, I think when I was less mature, when I was a young man, I was a little bit more trollish. I was thinking like, oh, I'm just going to inflict this on other people. I was a little bit more self-centered in its application, perhaps. So as a result, I offended people. I broke connections with people. And over time, I kind of learned this idea that, no, you want to use this in the service of people. Like, wouldn't it be nice to provoke people in a way that isn't a slap in the face, but rather provoke people in a way where they're like, I never thought of that. This kind of lean in kind of provocation. But it took me some decades, to be honest, to start getting that right.
That's interesting. So it started as something that was potentially having a negative effect in your life and interactions, but then you learned how to harness it in a way that for for good, And have you any thoughts? Like it's probably difficult to do it in a format like this, but have you any thoughts for, say, someone listening to this that would tend to sort of follow conventional norms and everything else as well, but they would like to maybe think for themselves a little bit more, like someone that say they want to zag when everybody else is zigging, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that phrase. Um, it's interesting because we're largely talking about coaching. This is something that I would train coaches to do in their coaching sessions, which is just sort of ask the fundamental questions. I'll give you a recent example. I was working with a coaching context where someone was overwhelmed. And they basically said, I need rest. I'm just burnt out. I'm working long hours. I'm kind of type A driven person, but it's just not working. It's taking a toll on my health, my well being, everything. And I think for some novice coaches, it would be very tempting to want a thought partner to solve that. Great. What can you do about it? How can we get you some rest? What are we going to do to take on less work? How can you, whatever it is, like, let's solve the problem you're saying. And that's an understandable instinct. But the question that occurred to me is, what constitutes rest? Like, just what is rest? What does rest buy you? What does rest look like? What's the smallest possible thing that could count as rest? And just asking these fundamental questions, like, let's just not assume that we all know what rest is or agree what rest is or agree what rest is for. And that comes fairly naturally to me, but I think that people can learn that, which is just see how much we're running on cultural scripts, how much we're running on assumptions, and just take a time out and ask those questions. But even that is a bit of a skill because you don't want to, just go down the rabbit hole of like, well, what are these words I'm saying? Well, what's language? What am I? And it can kind of spin out into this existential void. Uh, so I think you want to do a targeted amount of questioning the fundamentals, sort of think, where would that be most helpful? Where would it matter the most? But then you can leave it aside and go ahead and make some assumptions. Go ahead and think that we both speak the same language, we both understand things, and that we do ultimately want to solve problems or improve lives.
Okay. Well, are there any, you mentioned assumptions there a few times. Are there any assumptions that are widely held in coaching practice that you feel are particularly harmful?
Uh, yes, is my short answer. Part of this has to do with coaching culture, and part of this has to do with the era in which we find ourselves living. So it will come as no surprise to people that we have this life where we're humans interacting, but we also have an online life. And an online life is a briefer life, one that's marked by thumbs up and smiley faces and one sentence comments. And it's like life in brief. And we broadcast messages in brief, right? It's not you and I sitting down over dinner for 2 hours and hashing something out. It's just me writing some pithy phrase. And there's loads of this in coaching. So people who go through coach training, they come to just learn these. It's almost like fortune cookie wisdom, I would say, just these kind of like one sentence things. Like, I don't believe in shoulds. Like, okay, what exactly does that mean? I don't believe in shoulds. I think when I hear someone say that, they're saying sometimes people put undue pressure on themselves because of external obligations, and that would be a completely sensible thing to think. On the other hand, what's wrong with obligations? And this is like one of those fundamental questions. Every culture in the world places some premium on doing your social obligations, doing your duty. We value loyalty. We think that a bystander should help an accident victim. We think that people with privilege should aid people without privilege. I mean, those are shoulds that actually sound morally valuable to us, and certainly aid in cooperation and the functioning of society. So I would say, let's not foreclose on an idea like, I don't believe in shoulds, but rather, let's say, but what are we trying to get across when we say that? And I think that coaching, to your question, is just full of these. I'm using I don't believe in shoulds as a single example. I literally think there are just dozens and dozens of these. And this is, in fact, why I started writing Positive Provocation, to sort of just poke at some of those and say, you're not wrong for saying those, but let's just think through each one.
Yeah, in the book, so you go through 25 of the provocations, and you sort of poke at both ends of the extremes, and then you often arrive at a middle way, a sort of gray area. So it's always it's neither just black or white. It's always like somewhere in the middle, and that's where we normally land, And something else you discussed in the book, which really stood out for me, was the impact that observation and learning how to do this effectively has had on your coaching practice. This seems to be something that's really had a beneficial effect on your coaching practice. So I was just curious, how did you go about using observation as a tool for improving your coaching skills?
You've just mentioned two things. One is your question about observation, but before that, you also mentioned this middle way, and I kind of want to address that before getting to the observation question. One of the answers we often hear from people when we ask a question is, it depends. And people view this as a kind of intellectual sophistication, like, oh, look at me. I'm context sensitive, so I'll say it depends. If I try and force you into a yes, no answer, do you believe that people should do X or people should do Y? And they'll say, it depends. And I find it depends to be one of the least satisfying answers in the world, because it's essentially useless unless you follow it up with what it depends upon. And that, to me, is the richness of reflecting about it. It depends on these identifiable factors, or it depends on this cultural leaning, or it depends on what your client is bringing to the table. Whatever it is, it depends is just opening the door, but it's not walking through it. And I want people to walk through the door. So in those provocations, I'm not just arriving only at a middle way, but I do think that is an accurate description. I'm trying to say, here are some factors upon which it might depend. Here are some factors that you ought to consider. Now arrive at your own conclusion. So just wanted to drill down on that before moving to observation. I was, I'm not going to say a mediocre coach, but let's call it an average coach. I was an average coach for a long time. I want to be right up front about that, because I also think in coaching, there's this idea that I'm amazing. I've got the golden tongue. I help all my clients. There's this kind of inflationary culture. And I would just say, I think I was a decent coach, maybe a decade. I thought I provided like pretty okay service to people. They found it helpful, but I probably thought that I was better than I was. But I was okay. And I started watching other coaches coach a lot. Sometimes there are services online where you can actually get together in these sort of fishbowl experiences and watch a real coach with a real client. I started training people. I started attending trainings where I was watching others coach. And for a long time, while I watched those coaching sessions, I was just coaching in my head. So, Niall, I might watch you coach someone else, and I'd just be like, why isn't Niall using a metaphor there? The client just used a metaphor. I can't believe that Niall's not picking up on the metaphor. Use the metaphor. Come on. And it dawned on me that I was just doing the coaching alongside you, and that I was learning almost nothing from that, because I already know how I would coach. I already can pick up a metaphor and use it when a client offers it. And it was a huge pivot point for me to put all of my stuff on the back burner and just start asking, what's Niall doing? with his client. He's coaching in a way that's different than I would coach. And I have something to learn from that. This coach is focusing on one type of topic, or this coach is making a different decision than I would make in this moment. This coach is choosing to intentionally ignore something the client said that I might have picked up. What's going on? Like that coach is a smart, experienced professional. What is it that's going on inside them that might be just as effective or even more effective than my own instincts? And there is a kind of intellectual humility that goes with that. It's sort of a recognition that your way of thinking and doing is limited, is biased. And I find it tremendously liberating. I love to see people who coach in a style that's so different than me, even a style that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, even a style that I would say I wouldn't recommend that. And then I would see that it's just as effective. And wow, that's kind of a hard pill for me to swallow. Like, wow, you did something that I would say don't do, and yet it worked. And as I engaged in that process more, I just found that I was growing. I was being more experimental. I was trying new techniques. There was an openness in me. And I think my coaching growth shot up from that point on.
That's so interesting. So this ability to kind of bracket uh, your own thinking about what the coach should be doing in that context, and actually just observe what they were doing, and having that kind of beginner's mind about it seemed to really accelerate your learning. And are there any other habits or practices that you feel have had a really positive impact on your development as a coach that might often be overlooked in the industry?
Yeah, something that came about by happenstance. And it is, I'm a coach trainer. And as is common with many coach trainers, we do a lot of coaching demonstrations. But if you're running a 90-minute session, a 3-hour session, a 60-minute session, and you want to do a demonstration, it's going to be a relatively short demonstration. And so across the last 15 years or so that I've really been a full-time coach trainer, I've done a lot of short sessions, a lot of 12-minute sessions, a lot of 15-minute sessions. I mean, countless. And I would never have guessed how efficient it would make my coaching. And I just started realizing, like, wait a minute, you can actually do a start to finish coaching session in 15 minutes. And I started experimenting with that. Sometimes I run a practicum where coaches get together and just try out things. And I'd be like, just try 5-minute coaching where you're setting an agenda for 1 minute, you're exploring for 3 minutes, and you're kind of doing wrap up for 1 minute, and just see what you accomplish in that space. Now, I don't think that's how all coaching should be, but it's kind of shocking how much you can accomplish even in 5 minutes. So I never set out to do this, but there is just something in the habit of short coaching that makes you think about sort of what are the crucial elements, what's the most efficient way to do this, what is sort of the size of the coaching package, if you will, the session, how does that affect sort of the urgency of the work, and just so much came out of that.
I really like that. I've never heard that shared before, but I suppose you're getting so much more learning, and then those kind of tighter feedback loops as well must mean that you're learning more in such in a smaller period of time. Now, if you were, let's say that you were going back to before you started as a coach, Robert, right? You're starting from scratch, and knowing what you now know, how would you approach two things? How would you approach your development? So, like your goal, let's imagine your goal was to become the best coach you could be. And the second thing is, how would you actually approach the practicalities of building a profitable coaching business as well? Those two elements, if you're starting from scratch.
Okay. Those are big questions. I like it. I've liked all these questions, by the way, quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, if I were sort of giving a younger Robert, the benefit of my accumulated wisdom, I would say a couple things about building yourself as a coach. And I don't mean the practice. And I'm not talking about the business aspect. I'm just talking about being a coach. Um, Patience is one thing. Excuse me. I see in my coach trainees a frequent impatience to be a master. And it's understandable. It's understandable because coaching is just a conversational technology, and we all are pretty expert conversationalists. We're reasonable listeners. Most of us, whether you have an HR background or psychotherapy background or you're an educator, you understand some things about facilitation. So you kind of feel like, this is a bit like my driving exam. You're a teenager, you go out and you get 100 hours of practice driving, and you're kind of like, yeah, I can drive. And then you just think you're kind of a good driver. And in fact, anyone that's had a teenager that they've taught to drive, that teenager probably thinks they're a pretty good driver more often than not. Coaching is easy to learn and hard to master. I mean, there's a reason that organizations like the International Coaching Federation require a minimum 100 hours or 500 or thousands of hours, depending on the level of certification you're trying to attain. It's going to just take years to get better and better and better at this. And it's sort of in identifiable stages. You learn sort of these basic competencies, basic skills. Can I just craft a great question? And once you get that down and it becomes second nature, it frees up your cognitive load. Now you have the mental resources to sort of notice what's happening with the client a little more. And now you're like, oh, okay. Now I'm noticing more. And that means I can ask better questions because I already can ask a good question. I already have that architecture, that skill. But now I can apply it to the thing I'm noticing. So now it's a targeted question. And then as you get better at that, it really frees you up to make even kind of more advanced decisions. Like, when shouldn't I ask a question? When should I have the client pose a question to themselves? When should I pose a more challenging question? Should I phrase it in a way that's a bit of a push rather than a bit of a support? And so, you're always kind of on this evolutionary continuum. So that's what I would tell my younger self. Like, be patient. Like, you're only just going to get better and better and better, and there's no reason to default to like, wow, I've been doing this a year and a half. I'm pretty amazing. I don't think of anything that anyone's doing for a year and a half. You wouldn't be like, yeah, you're just in the elite class, a year and a half in. So it's the long haul, I think.
Uh, that's so interesting. It reminds me, have you read The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin by any chance?
No, but I will do. Let me write it down.
He's a guy, he was the world chess champion, and then he applied the same approach to learning to Tai Chi push hands, and he became the world champion of that. And then Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and he's like got like the highest level black belt in BJJ as well. And his whole approach to learning is a little bit similar to what you've outlined there, but he would like understand what the fundamental competencies were in a particular field, and then he would just drill those repeatedly, so they became like part of his sort of second nature, part of like his unconscious. So like when you're driving, you don't think now about changing gears or moving the clutch. It's part of your nature, and that frees your attention, your prefrontal cortex, to focus on other aspects of the environment. So similar in coaching, like you master these basics, these fundamentals, and then that's freeing up more and more of your attention to add new competencies, notice new things, and try different things out, I suppose. Experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. As a coach trainer, I'm interested in kind of being transparent about that process right up front. In coach training, I think that there's sort of what I would consider the guardrails approach, which is we're going to put I don't know if you call them like training wheels on the bicycle. Like, we're going to really just teach you, like, here's a formula. It's just these 4 steps, and that's what you do in coaching. Or here, like, a question has to be open ended, and that's not a yes no question. And you just give people these really basic things. And then, kind of later in life, they can learn that there are exceptions to those. Those don't always hold true. There's a lot more nuance. But if you can just get this down, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in training people like that. That's not, however, how I train. I do an alternative, which is sort of like, yeah, you should understand that basically open-ended questions are pretty good, better than closed-ended questions. But I also want to be upfront that a closed-ended question occasionally can work beautifully and an open-ended question can fizzle. So let's just not default on that. But yeah, by and large, you should kind of ask more open-ended questions. But I just want you to know what sort of medium experienced and masterful coaching look like. And so you're spending all your time thinking about, like, how do I ask a great question? And that's novice coaching. Kind of, when do I ask a great question? It's sort of like medium coaching. And then the things that the masterful coaches are doing, I think they have so many free cognitive resources that they're thinking about things like pace. How do I just slow this session down? And why would I do that? And what would be the benefit of that? Or why might I artificially speed it up or put a little urgency into it? But you have to have a lot of mental space free to be paying attention to that level of facilitation.
So we've spoken a lot about observing other coaches. And something that's kind of coming to mind for me now is, are there any coaches that you've observed and by doing so, you've really learned a lot? Like, is there anybody in the field that you really respect and you think you can learn a lot by just watching this person coach?
Yeah, several people, but one I'll call out in particular is Marsha Reynolds. So Marsha Reynolds, big name in the field. She used to be the ICF president at one time. She's written a bunch of coaching books, trains a lot of coaches, and fortunately for all of us, she does a lot of kind of public, coaching. So you might have opportunity to see her coach. I'll be upfront. She coaches very differently than me, and that's part of what I like. So one of the things that I do that I think is different than many coaches is I really don't focus on the idea of like self-limiting beliefs. And I'm even kind of opposed to it. This is, I think the majority of coaches do this. What's holding you back? How might you be standing in your own way? What story might you be telling yourself about this? What are your self-limiting beliefs? That's standard fare in coaching. I'm going to make up a statistic. 85% of coaches are doing this. I mean, like, the vast majority of coaches are being trained in it and doing it. It totally rubs me the wrong way. I don't like it. I think you're kind of like pitting your client to be at war with themselves. Like, if only you can defeat the worst angels of your nature, then some better you will emerge victorious. I think that's kind of just a rough way to engage with someone. Now, having said that, and you can see I have a strong belief about it, Marsha totally does it, and she does it elegantly. She does it extraordinarily well, and it's very helpful to her clients. Like, she ushers her clients exactly where they want to go. And so I have to, every time I watch her, like, be a little bit humble and be like, frankly, I think she's a better coach than I am. And she's doing something that sort of philosophically isn't aligned with my approach. And yet, I'll be the first to admit she's doing it well and it's effective. And so to me, that's such a great learning experience. And I just come back to that again and again and again.
That's fantastic. Well, that's the beginner's mind again. There's such value in that. If you have that, you can learn from anybody, even people that take a totally opposite approach to what you do. I really liked the definition you shared in the book of coaching, where it's a conversation to guide the client towards self-directed learning or something along those lines. I thought that there's so much in there. Can you maybe expand a little bit on this definition and why this is so important?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of definitions of coaching, and I didn't create that one. But I think it's helpful just to think of coaching thematically. So you could say, coaching is about identity, right? And that's what it's about. You're just exploring identity, and you'd have some great conversations with people about that. Coaching is just a change process. Oh, people are in change, so let's talk about that. Coaching is about relationship. Really, it's just us here. So maybe that's the best lens by which we'd look at it. Those are all really helpful ways to look at coaching. But I just love this idea that coaching is engaging a client in self-directed learning. Um, First of all, that it's self-directed, right? That positions the roles of each party pretty clearly. That I'm facilitating this process, but it's you that are directing it, and it's about you. It's learning. So my principal value as a coach, I think, is in asking you questions you haven't thought to ask yourself.
Mm.
Right? It's why it's the limit of self-coaching, right? Like if I could just self-coach, I would never need to hire a coach. But my coach will ask me questions that I've just never thought of. And maybe it's a question like, what constitutes rest? What's the smallest thing you could do that would actually be recharging? You're like, I've never really thought about it that way. And what that does is it leads to, hopefully some aha moments, some new insights, some increased self-awareness, and that's half the battle. If that's where coaching stopped, we shouldn't do coaching, which is unfortunate because if you ask coaches, what do you love about coaching? They often say, oh, I love it when my clients have aha moments. Because, of course, that feels good to us because I'm the one that just set that up. I just asked you the question that led to that. So I get to, in some indirect way, claim some ownership in this process. Like, isn't that awesome how I just helped you? But you have to then use the learning. Like, learning's only good if it's applied, right? If someone knows all the facts in the world and they never speak out loud, well, then that's just sort of trapped in a vault and not going anywhere. So what the client is doing then between sessions, which is where the real change occurs, is experimenting with the new learning. And I never use the word homework. I'm not saying you should go out and do this. And I think homework entails kind of a success failure paradigm that's unnecessary. But yeah, okay, you had this aha moment. Maybe it's true. Probably is. What are you going to do with that? Like, go out and tinker with your life a bit. Maybe that's you're going to interview someone. Maybe it's you're going to have a tough conversation. Maybe it's you're going to journal. Maybe it's I don't know what you're going to do. But will that learning lead to change? And I think that's ultimately the value of coaching, that it has to lead to change in order for us to think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Hmm. Yeah, something that just sprung to mind there as well is Charlie Munger's definition of learning. He said something like, "It's only learning if behavior changes," and I suppose that's similar. And you've a whole chapter on or a whole provocation on that in the book, like about homework, and you used to talk about experiments instead. So, practically speaking, let's say that you were coaching me and I came to you with a problem. Um, let's say it was, I don't know, I was working with somebody and we were really trying to improve the working relationship. It was difficult. How might you work with me to create an experiment in that context to help me improve that?
It would emerge. I'm wrestling with the "it depends" answer, which I'm not going to give you, but it would emerge from the process of how we work. Um, I lean towards solutions focused approaches in my work. So just to set that up for people, and I'm not a solutions focused purist, but I'm a solutions focused leaner. Sort of, rather than say like, oh, let's look at the problem, the cause of the problem. You're not getting along with your coworker. What have you tried before? Those kinds of things. Just sort of like, what would a good relationship look like? But what is it you're shooting for? Let's just envision that. When are times that you did have that? What are your own instincts about that? Right? That's kind of a very typical solutions focused approach towards addressing the opposite of your problem, which is the solution, right? What is the good relationship you're striving for? Out of that, it just follows that you're going to have some things to try. And it can be just as easy as asking you, like, now that we've talked about what this good relationship would look like, what do you notice about that? How do you feel about that? What do you think you might do with that? And you're like, well, actually, you're right. Last year I was getting along with my coworker a lot better. I'm going to really, think about what it was we were going to lunch. That's one thing we were doing. So maybe I could try going to lunch every now and again, or whatever it is that emerges from it, is then what you're going to tinker with. And you heard me use that word tinker before, because the way I think of it, it is just an experiment. And if you think about what an experiment does, an experiment just provides new data, learning, but so that we can take the next step. Experiments don't prove things. You're not like, we did this experiment and now for all time we know the answer. It's, we got some new data in, and that kind of pushes us a direction. And we want to ask the next experimental question that will give us new data and refine our direction, and just continue to refine our direction over multiple experiments. And I think that is the process of change.
I suppose it's a process of natural selection as well, variation, selection, retention, same principles apply. And we're speaking there about what happens, what you typically like to do after a session, setting these experiments. Is there anything that you do before sessions, Robert, that really helps you show up as the best coach you can be? Like any practices, any habits that you find really effective for showing up?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'll tell you that I've asked loads of coaches, and here, I don't know if it's hundreds or thousands, what do you do to prepare? And it's exactly the stuff you'd imagine. I take care of my biological needs. I review my notes. I do something, I take a short walk. I look outside. I meditate. I do some yoga. I stretch. I pet my dog, whatever. Like, it's not just anything. No one has ever said I make sure to play a full game of tennis before each session. Like, no one's ever answered that. They answer these kind of like mental stability centering, review of notes, biological needs. Like, it's a pretty narrow set of stuff that people do. But the thing that I'm so interested in is, what is it you're preparing? But like, what's the result of this? Everyone has this instinct. So I'm going to stretch, do yoga, look at a natural scene, or walk outside. Why? Like, what is it you're hoping as a result of that? And I think I have a reasonable answer to that, which is, we're preparing a state of emotional calm. I rarely have heard coaches say, I run up and down flights of stairs as fast as I can, pumping my fist in the air, going, yeah, I'm just psyched to see my client. I can't wait to see my client. Coaches don't do that. That would be preparing like a high arousal state, an excited state. And they don't. 99% totally made up statistic of coaches that I've talked to, and this is thousands of coaches, are preparing a low arousal state, a calm state. And I think the reason is because if a client comes into the session excited, you can raise up from being calm. If they're like, hey, I just got that promotion we've been working on. If you're calm, you can be like, wow, great, and step into that excited space. But the reverse is not true. You don't want to, be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to see you now. I've been looking forward to this all week. How's everything going? And you're like, I didn't get the job. I mean, just crushing. And then it feels a little bit like a miss, right? A missed opportunity, a misalignment. So I think there's just some intuition people have that you start calm and adjust, and that's superior to starting in another state and adjusting. So that's one of the things that I do.
Brilliant. Makes a lot of sense to me. I suppose if you're in that calm state, you can it's very easy to adjust from there. Whereas if you're really highly aroused, then it's you're a lot less flexible at where you can go after that. And something else, as we're jumping around a lot here, Robert, but there is a lot I want to. You have 25 provocations in there, so there's a lot of ground to cover. You talk about the equation for positive provocation, and it's something like it's the strength of the argument plus the novelty of the argument multiplied by the openness to the argument on the other side. The thing that I wanted to ask you about that is what can be done, or how do you help to increase the openness variable there? Like, how do you help people be more open to positive provocation?
So I think you do some prep work. If you look at the ICF core competencies, one of them is creating trust and safety, right? This idea that in a coaching relationship, you're trying to be accepting, acknowledging, listening respectfully in ways that do make the client open, right? You can kind of think of it as a positivity bank account. If I'm respectful to you and I'm acknowledging you and I admire you and I see the good in you, then every once in a while I get to poke you. Just kind of like you do with your best friends, right? Like every once in a while you get to tease them and kind of take them down a peg because they also know that you truly love them. And I think ultimately people are learning best, that idea of you're engaging them in self-directed learning, when they are just kind of open. They're open to your questions. Wow, I've never considered it like that. And one of the problems you mentioned this sort of formula. It's like the novelty and the strength of the argument or the thesis, whatever you're introducing. Sometimes people go for novelty, and it's just like a little too weird. If I'm like, your best performance at work will come from an alien inhabiting your body. And if the alien's super smart and good at stuff, then you'll be a great manager. Like, that's a really novel argument. You've probably never read a business book that advocates that, like alien possession. Super novel, but it's not helpful. It's like too weird for people, and it lacks substance. And I think what people really respond to is the substantive nature of an argument. If you make a strong evidentiary based argument, if you say, you know what, I've interviewed thousands of coaches about how they prepare for sessions, and I notice a strong leaning for calm, that automatically puts some evidentiary weight behind what I'm saying. It's a stronger argument than if I say, well, here's what I do, and I've got some years of experience, so I think that's great. That also might be valid, but the two arguments sound different to you. So you just have to make sure that the strength is in there. And I think the strength is something that people are open to.
Interesting. Something I wanted to run past you, and sort of building on what you said in the earlier part of that answer was, so I spoke with your colleague Ian Day on Wednesday about his approach to challenging coaching. And one of the things we were discussing was the idea, that like for challenge to work in coaching, you need to have that kind of secure base first. And it's sort of like it needs to be 80% of the sort of non-directive support, like that's 80% of it, and then that allows the 20% of challenge, when that's where the real kind of growth and everything happens in coaching. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like it, and I definitely respect Ian's work a lot, and think that he's a good thinker about coaching. And that, I mean, it squares a bit with what I said about kind of like a positivity bank account, right? If I'm saying, wow, you ask great questions, Niall, you pay very good attention, you're a great listener, those are all authentic acknowledgments. I do actually believe those about you. And then that helps us, because that there are things about you I respect. So then if I have to make criticism or say something like, well, have you ever considered this? Or what if you tried to improve that? you know that I'm on your side already. You know that I have your best interests at heart. You know that any challenge I'm offering um, is sort of done with love. And I think challenge itself exists on a continuum. There's what I would think of as a soft challenge, kind of like, well, what if? And then there's like the blunt challenge, which is just, I'm going to say something and I want to know how you react to it. You're dead wrong. Like, boom, like that's a hard challenge. But sometimes something like that can be amazing in coaching. I have a colleague one time whose client was sort of bragging about being Machiavellian. And the coach was like, that's not Machiavellian, and just sort of dismissed it and was like, if you were really like truly Machiavellian, this is what you would have done instead. And I was like, wow, that is provocative, right? Like they don't teach that in coaching school, right? Here's how to, slap your client a bit. But it was built on their very good relationship. And it was something that the client actually respected quite a way. The client wasn't just hiring, a yes person. The client was hiring someone to push back and to call them out. And so those blunt challenges, I think, can be really effective, although to Ian's point, used judiciously. Like that can't be 90% of your coaching.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And you speak a bit about in the book about giving advice in coaching and the nuances here. Like this is not a simple, you either don't do it or you do. Like, what are your thoughts on the optimal approach to giving advice in coaching?
I mean, I agree with probably most coaches that I mostly think you don't do it because I think when clients come up with their own answers, one, those answers are better tailored to their specific context. Two, they feel more empowering. They're more invested in those answers because they're the ones that came up with it. Three, those answers might be more generalizable. So not only am I kind of solving this problem, but now I realize I can solve all similar problems because I, have experience with this. So I think there's great benefit in not giving advice. But I also just don't love the idea that like there would never be any circumstance under which we could ever give any kind of advice, like that is a blanket prohibition. This is one of those things in coach training where I'm like, look, if you're a beginning coach and you're learning to train, just don't give advice. Just learn how to do coaching. If you have 2 years of experience, probably still don't give advice. Like just get 2 years of experience of coaching under your belt where you're like, I can help my client arrive at new self-awareness and craft experiments for change. Right? It's like you don't put a 16-year-old in a Formula One car. You just want them to learn to drive a Honda just on the road normally. The Formula One is for further down the line when you really have some skills. If a client asks me for a book recommendation, it would feel a little weird to me to be like, well, what does your heart tell you about what book to read? What are your own instincts about reading in this area? I mean, especially because they're asking me typically because I actually know the area they're talking about. Maybe it's an area of psychological science. And so I'll just give them a book recommendation. I say, here's a couple that you might consider. And here's why I'm recommending them. Now that's small. I mean, is that direct advice about what they should do? Well, in a way, yes, because I'm saying they should probably read those books if that's something they're interested in, and those books would be beneficial to them. I have definitely used advice strategically where I have used it as a touch point for the client to react to. So again, I set it up as a thesis, and I'm like, I just want to know how you'll react. Niall, don't do it. Right? And I'll just say something blunt like that. And what I want is to see what their response is. Like, why is Robert saying don't do it? And that I might actually even believe that I generally think they shouldn't do whatever they're talking about. But they might be like, well, I find I'm relieved when you say that, Robert, or I find I'm disappointed, or I find I want to argue against you. And I'm like, great, because my making a suggestion isn't enforceable. I can't force you to either accept or reject my suggestion, but I can definitely use it as bait. I can use it as fodder for thought. So just even those mild examples suggest to me that there's room to wiggle room around just the idea of what counts as advice. And I do know that there are some coaches who, kind of jump ship for a minute and be like, let's do some mentorship for a moment, right? Because I have loads of experience in this, and I am just going to tell you a few things that tend to work pretty well. And so a lot of times advice is just in the form of education. I do this very sparingly. I mean, it's probably, less, it's like 3%, again, another made up statistic, 3% of all of my coaching might be something like this. But I just want people to know that it could exist and it's worth considering.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's imagine that there is a coach somewhere in the world in a bookstore and they pick up Positive Provocation. They buy it, they take it home, and they really engage with the ideas. They read it thoughtfully, they think it through. How do you want that person's life and thinking to be different after reading your book than it was before? What was your intention here?
Oh, I love that question. At risk of sounding immodest, I think that Positive Provocation is a different kind of book. I mean, most books on coaching are sort of like, hey, here's an approach to coaching. Here's how coaching works. Here how you should coach using solutions focus or clean language. Here's how you should coach with executives. Here, like I'm an expert and I'm teaching you a formula or a process, and those are helpful, right? It's like here's a tool. Positive Provocation is very different than that. Positive Provocation is more like, y'all ought to just be thinking about coaching. Just think more. Like, don't have it figured out. And even sometimes when I wrote some of the provocations, I'm like, I don't know what I think about this. And even through the writing of the provocation, I changed my mind. I'm like, I think I've modified how I think about this just as I've thought about it more, as I've read research or as I've interviewed other coaches. And it's one of the only books I can think of where I'm saying, here's some stuff to think about, and I don't care where you, the reader, the coach, end up. You could end up being like, Robert, I think you are dead wrong. That does not square with my experience as a coach, and I flatly reject what you're offering. And I think that's fine. And I think it's great because you thought through that conclusion. I think the hazard comes in intellectual foreclosure. The idea that, well, this is how I was taught to do it, and that's how I'm doing it. And I've never really questioned anything or thought through the process. But if you're like, I thought through all the nuance, I really considered some of the research you were talking about, and I still think you're wrong, thumbs up to you. Because now you have a rationale. Now you understand probably with a greater degree of nuance. Now you feel stronger in your conviction. And maybe you tailor what you thought. Like, oh yeah, I mostly think the way I used to think was right, but Robert's convinced me maybe in 10% of cases that's not true. Or maybe you radically change your thinking. Again, it doesn't matter where on that spectrum you end up. What matters is that you continually think through the process.
And it doesn't just apply to coaching. I think, the big thing that you can take from Robert's book is that you can apply the same way of thinking about almost all conventional wisdom in your life and not just accept things blindly because that's the way they have been done or the way everybody does them. And if you can do that, you become, you can really start thinking originally about problems and start thinking from first principles as opposed to just social norms. So it's a real gift to be able to do that. And while we're on the topic of books, Robert, are there any other books aside from your own that you have most recommended to coaches that want to improve?
Yes. Um, my colleague and a co-author of mine, Christian Van Nieuwerburg, has written two books. One for beginners, it's an introduction to coaching skills. And you could view this as just like a very solid textbook that's very thoughtful about how to do coaching. It's in its, I think it's just coming out in its fourth edition. So that should tell you a little something about its staying power, that they continually are revising it and updating it. It sold very well, and it's used in coach training programs all over. And then he also has one that's I don't know if I'm going to get the title exactly right, but it's basically like advanced coaching practices. And here, what he's done is sort of created these tensions. So, for example, how much do I retain authenticity as a coach versus adapt myself to my client? And that there's a tension between those two things. And that is a more advanced concern in coaching. And he has a whole bunch of these tensions. And I think that's a great tool to think through some of these more advanced practices.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you personally, why coach? Why choose this as a career path? Why does coaching get you out of bed in the morning?
Such a good question. It's not going to surprise you. I'm going to give you a different answer than some others might if you ask this to all of your guests. Coaching doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. I actually just asked this question to a bunch of people. What do you love about coaching? And they're like, I have a service mentality. I love helping people. I love seeing people succeed. My mission is to create more well-being in the world. I believe in performance. All of those kind of very understandable answers. And I thought, yeah, those are great. And if that happens with my clients, and I have a very kind of small practice that normally I just keep a couple clients on, in part because I like serving them, but also in part just to keep my skills fresh. Like I want to just always be using my skills. I don't want them to atrophy. My mission is to coaching in general. So most coaches' mission is to their clientele. Mine is to coaching. My whole mission is I want coaching to be better. I want coaches to be more ethical, more nuanced in their thinking, committed to a lifetime of growth and professional evolution. And that's my mission. That's what's getting me out of bed in the morning. And then I hope in some indirect way I get to claim credit for all of their helping of all of their clients.
I love it. So you're more focused on the culture of coaching than the practice, like the one-on-one practice. Well, if you impacts your aim, like that's where the focus should be. And I ask a lot of people I interview this, and if nothing comes to mind, don't worry. But you strike me as someone that thinks very deeply and questions a lot. And probably you've thought through a lot of existential topics as well. You've traveled the world, you've lived with the Amish, the Inuits, and a whole bunch of other cultures that aren't coming to mind right now. But the question that I'm going to ask you to wrap up here, Robert, is um, what is your view on the purpose of human life in general? Purpose of existing. What are we? And because everybody has an answer to this, whether they've thought it through or not. But what are we doing here? What's the point of this? Would you say?
That's such a good wrap-up question. It's so big. It's a very attractive question. I mean, the short answer is I don't know, and I don't know why my opinion should matter more than anyone else's opinion on this. I'll tell you some things that have challenged me about the thinking about this. I have a friend who is a documentary filmmaker. He's really excellent, Academy Award nominated. Uh, and he once interviewed a surfer in Brazil. And this guy just lives like in a little hut on the beach, raised a daughter, just kind of surfs every day. And I had a lot of conversations with my friend about, like what is this guy's purpose? Like, is this guy good for the world? And some people would be like, oh well, he doesn't have this profound legacy where he's impacting millions of people, and he's never, he's not a founder. He didn't set up, all this kind of like urban modern, stuff that we're all into. And and the surfer just sort of has this very small life. And that feels of profound significance to me. That's just sort of a life well lived kind of idea rather than a life lived loudly. And I actually think a life lived loudly could also be well lived. I mean, that can be wonderful too. So I think the questions for me are, what makes a life well lived,
Hmm.
right? What, regardless of the scope of it, regardless of you're impacting one person or a million people. But I do think that impact is one of those things that when you touch the people around you, you want them to feel better for it.
Fantastic. Okay. Okay. And you offer trainings through Positive Acorn for coaches. Can you tell us about how the people listening to this can access those trainings and when intakes might happen, for example, as well?
Yeah, we're very boutique. I'll tell you right now, we take on about 35 people a year. So we're like the world's smallest coaching school. We go very in depth, very long time, and I'm a super demanding instructor. This isn't something that you could just show up to a Zoom meeting and eat your bowl of spaghetti and have your camera off for. Like, I am demanding. It's an all-in experience. But people can find out more at Positive Acorn, and they can make a decision for themselves whether it would be suitable for them.
Fantastic. All right, Robert, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. And I wish you the best going forward.
Thanks. This was a delight. I really appreciate it.